welcome everyone. Welcome our speakers. Welcome you. I'm really honored to be here to moderate the session. I'm Pauline Lucas, a new policy officer since January at EHP. So I'm really happy to meet the community for the first time. So I'm pleased that you're here today to discuss a very important topic. Okay, I will let you settle. All right. So today we are going to discuss a very important topic, the implementation of the EU energy package. The package, as you know, was adopted at the end of last year, and discussion has started at national level to implement the provision. Some member states have already made some proposal, but most of member states are still working on how to transpose. The Commission did not start from a blank slate. It's actually the third energy package, and it is amending existing texts such as the renewable energy, the energy efficiency, and the energy performance of building directives, only to quote the three most important texts for our sector. So to get there, it's been quite a journey. It did not involve any submarine or any balloons, and it did not take us to the center of the Earth, and neither 20,000 leagues under the sea. But most importantly, it took district heating and cooling on the EU agenda. But getting the attention of the European Commission could be first seen as a risk, and no sector likes to be regulated. So predictably, when the package was first published, there were rather mixed feelings about this package. On the one hand, there were some very positive political signals. For instance, the recognition of our sector's potential to contribute to key European goals, boosting the share of renewables, cutting greenhouse gas emissions, and increasing the security of supply. For the first time, DHC was understood as a driver for the energy transition. And we got a dedicated article in the Renewable Energy Directive. Moreover, our most pressing issues were addressed. For instance, the promotion of waste heat and cold, as well as the fair treatment of off-site and on-site renewables. And on the other hand, however, there were also some challenges. In the initial text, we had an unconditional third-party access for heat suppliers that was foreseen, and it could have come with some risk of price increase and also less reliability for our systems. And there were also some uncertainties with the status of waste heat and also the responsibility of district heating and cooling providers with regards to the metering and billings obligation. We will talk about this. But so it was clear that our sector wouldn't go without negotiating. And this is what we did. We negotiated. So the success factor, I believe, of this negotiation was actually our capacity to build trust and install constructive dialogue with the European Commission. And I think that in the end, the sector has managed a balancing act to be recognized for its potential, but also its specificities, and to be proportionately regulated. This renewed framework is encouraging our growth in exchange of the assurance that we will deliver a green, affordable, and consumer-friendly district heating and cooling. And being part of this deal means that district heating and cooling keeps its relevance for the future as an actor of the energy transition. But now, the crucial point is to ensure that member states are carefully implementing this text in order not to compromise our commercial and technical viability. This is what we are going to discuss today with our three speakers. And Well, after the presentation, we will have some time to open a discussion among the panelists and finally to open the floor for you. But before delving in, I'd like to share a video with you that we have recorded with Carlis Goldstein from the European Commission, DG Energy, someone with whom EHP and its members have cooperated all along the negotiation of the package, and unfortunately couldn't be here with us today, but he wanted to share anyways some of his thoughts on the implementation. So, can we have the video, please?
Good morning, bonjour. It's a great pleasure to be here, virtually though, but I'm very flattered by the invitation of Euroheat and Power to be present here at the Congress. As you know, heating and cooling is a topic that the Commission is very intensively working with. But it's a paradox, and let me explain what I mean by this. It is a global issue, everybody is concerned by it, but it can only be provided locally. It's an individual issue, everybody needs heat, but we are regulating it at the European level. So what are we doing to resolve this paradox? Some of you may recall the heating and cooling strategy. The Clean Energy for All European package also provides some important pieces of legislation. The Energy Efficiency Directive, the Renewable Energy Directive, and the Governance Regulation, among other things. The Energy Efficiency Directive sets out a headline target for 2030 for the primary energy consumption. And it also sets out the requirements for comprehensive assessments. This is something that the Commission is currently in the process of revising. The Annex 8 of the Energy Efficiency Directive will be renewed, and by the time that this conference takes place, we're hoping to head for the publication for new requirements. Why is this important? You may have heard from the Renewable Energy Directive that it sets out new indicative targets for the share of renewables for district heating and cooling and for efficient cogeneration. This is very important for the heating and cooling sector because we know that many member states rely in achieving their energy efficiency and renewable energy targets on district heating and cogeneration. Now, Europe is really relying on your sector because heating and cooling makes up most of the energy demand in Europe. How does the Commission monitor the progress? For that, we have the governance regulation. The governance regulation sets out that member states have to plan and create measures to support climate targets and decarbonization. By the end of this year, we'll see the final national energy climate plans. And it is really important that each member state has a proper analysis on the heating and cooling sector. It's quite logical because it is such a big proportion of European Union's energy consumption. On top of that, the governance regulation foresees that there will be regular updates and there will be progress reports. These progress reports start from 2023. We will have also a revision of the Renewable Energy Directive in 2024. We will have the comprehensive assessments that will now need to include the reporting on the share of renewables and waste heat in the heating and cooling sector. The methodology is currently under revision by the Commission, and by the time that this conference takes place, we expect that these provisions will have passed the objection period of the Council and the Parliament, so they would be on the way to publication. What about transposition? Member states will have to transpose the provisions in Energy Efficiency Directive by 2020 and in the Renewables Directive by 2021. So right now is the best time, combined with a change in the political leadership of the European Commission, to have a discussion on these issues and to continue the good relationship we have between the heating and cooling sector and the European Commission. Thank you very much for being here today, and I expect to meet one or many of you in the coming future in person. Thank you very much and enjoy the day.
Well, now that we have set the scene with Carlis, let's delve into our topic of today. So our three speakers are all members of our EHP Energy Policy Committee, and therefore have been deeply involved in the negotiation of the package. We are going to start with Domenica Moczko from the AGFW, the German Energy Efficiency and District Heating and Cooling and CHP Association. Domenica joined the AGFW in 2014. You have a legal background, and you're a policy officer responsible for European affairs. The floor is yours, Domenica.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pauline, for the kind information view on my person. Hello. Hello, good afternoon, everybody from my side as well. I'm very happy and very pleased to talk to you today very briefly about the new Energy Efficiency Directive, to present you provisions which I titled Customer Empowerment. And alongside presenting you the European provisions, I would like to give you a brief overview of the German provisions as well, those that already exist and those missing as well. So the Energy Efficiency Directive amends the directive from 2012, which is already now in force. It sets, just like Carl said, new energy efficiency targets for 2030, both on European and national level. The implementation period of this directive is, generally speaking, June 2020. However, several provisions, including those that I will be focusing on, have to be implemented by 25th October 2020, the latest. So it means there is actually not much that time left for the member states to act. The provisions impose new obligations on the operators of district heating and district cooling networks, district cooling systems, regarding heat metering, billing, and providing particular information to consumers. The general target of these provisions is to increase the consumers' satisfaction, to allow them to regulate their consumption and thus achieve energy efficiency savings as well, at least ideally, to compare the offers of different suppliers and then probably as an aftermath switch the supplier as well. Who is actually the consumer in the meaning of the directive? The EED introduces two terms in this sense. First, final customer. These are all people being legal or natural persons having a direct and individual contract with the supplier. So if you take a look at this picture depicting the typical consumer structure in district heating, customer 1 and customer 2 would be considered final customers. However, alongside this term, the EED introduces a much broader term, final users. Final users comprise all final customers, but also those natural and legal persons that do not have a direct and individual contract with district heating, but inhabit the particular dwellings, the particular units of the houses or individual buildings, and use the heat. So if you take a look once again at the picture, we would say that both customer 1 and customer 2 and the tenants of these buildings are final users in the meaning of the EED. So the first obligation is the regulation regarding heat metering. The EED introduces two types of metering. First, building-related metering. So all final customers shall be provided with competitively priced meters. The meters shall be installed either at the heat exchanger or the point of delivery. And this is already the general obligation in Germany as well, accordingly to the ordinance on general conditions of heat delivery. The heat delivered shall be metered. However, there are several exceptions from this general rule, and the ordinance does not stipulate exactly at which point the meter shall be installed. So that would be the task now of the legislator to decide whether the exceptions are conform with the European law, probably not, and whether it is necessary to stipulate exactly where the meter is to be installed. The second type of metering is the sub-metering, so unit-related metering. And here the EED introduces a kind of hierarchy regarding the devices that must be installed, the individual meters being at the top of this hierarchy. However, should the installation of individual meters in every single unit of a house be not technically feasible or not cost-effective, then individual heat cost allocators are possible as well. Should this not be technically feasible or cost-effective, then alternative methods are allowed. And the member states shall publish here general criteria that support their decision in this respect. In Germany, the ordinance on heat cost allocators stipulates already that either individual meters or heat cost allocators shall be installed. But in practice, we observe that due to technical feasibility and cost efficiency, heat cost allocators are installed. There are, again, several exceptions from this general rule. For example, for students' dormitories or nursing houses, so with buildings with, let's say, increased inhabitants fluctuancy, the devices do not have to be installed. So probably the legislator would have to take this into consideration while publishing the general criteria as well. In new multi-apartment buildings, individual meters for hot water must be installed, and this is the case in Germany already. The EED provides also a requirement regarding the remote reading of the devices. I will tell you in a minute that in the future, several information will have to be provided more frequently to the final user, and therefore to avoid a burden on both sides, the user, but also the supplier or the landlord. Remotely readable devices must be installed from 25th October 2020. And all already existing devices must be either rendered remotely readable or exchanged by 1st January 2027. In Germany, about 95% of the meters installed are already remotely readable. However, they are not remotely read. There is no mandatory remote reading. So the task of the legislator would be first to impose such an obligation, and second, to stipulate, to decide which techniques are actually to be considered as remote reading. Now it is. The second obligation regards the billing. So where metering devices have been installed, the final users are to be provided regularly with billing and information on their consumption, basing on either actual consumption in case of individual meters or readings of heat cost allocators. The member states are therefore obliged to publish transparent and publicly available rules regarding the heat cost allocation, and to stipulate also who should be responsible for providing this information or the billing to final users, as we bear in mind the typical structure of customers in district heating. And in Germany, this is already the case with the ordinance on heat cost allocation, which I have already mentioned. The EED stipulates also the minimum frequency of providing both information and billing. It is at least once per year when the bills are to be provided to final users, and this is also the general rule in Germany now. However, after remotely readable devices have been installed, the frequency shall increase as well. And from 25th October 2020, billing or consumption information, so here should member states decide what should actually be provided to final users, are to be provided at least twice a year, in certain situations at least quarterly. And from 1st January 2022 onwards, the information on billing is to be provided on monthly basis. Heating and cooling might be exempted from this obligation in the respective period. Regarding the information that shall be provided to a final user, there is indeed a whole list of this that is included in the EED. The information shall be provided together with the bill when the bill is based on the actual consumption or the readings of heat cost allogators. And every single bubble that you can see reflects one type of information that should be provided. I start on the left top and then I continue consecutively counterclockwise. So the first information, this one, is the actual consumption and the prices. And this is pretty much the only piece of information that must be provided to final users in Germany. So nothing more is mandatory. So there is indeed a lot of scope for the legislator to act, and therefore so a lot of questions arise regarding what particularly shall be provided to the user. The second type of information is the fuel mix, the related greenhouse gas emissions and tariff levies and taxes that apply. Small systems below 20 megawatts might be exempted from the obligation to provide information on greenhouse gases. A comparison with the actual consumption of the final user with her consumption in the same period of time, the previous year, in graphic form shall be attached as well. Contact information to agencies or institutions that may provide information on energy efficiency improvement measures, description of complaints procedure, contact information to ombudsman, or alternative disputes ADR mechanism, alternative dispute resolution mechanism, shall be attached as well. And as a last piece of information, a comparison with the actual consumption of the final user with levelized or benchmarked final user in the same user category shall be provided as well. And here also, not that fast. Sorry. Here just as a summary, the provisions that are already in force in Germany or those that are missing, but this pretty much reflects that's what I have already said. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dominika, for this clear overview of the new provision from the Energy Efficiency Directive with regard to metering and billing and information obligations. We're going to move now to the revised Renewable Energy Directive that Monika Kusela from Fortum will outline for us, in particular with regard to the articles that concerns our sector. Monika is a senior advisor for Fortum, which she joined in 2005. You also have a legal background, and you're both a member of the AHP board and the vice chair of our Energy Policy Committee. So please, floor is
Thank you very much,
yours.
Pauline, and I'm very, very welcome also on my behalf. I'm very glad to see so many of you still here on this relatively heavy panel. I will try to keep it really brief. Of course, the Renewables Directive is a very large animal, but as Pauline already kindly mentioned, we will focus on the most relevant provisions and actually the reasoning why the Renewables Directive was coming under the revision. May I ask for that? Of course. Thank you so much. Yes. Let's see if I make it. Oh, that's a really fast device. Yes, that's a sensitive animal. So I would like to just to set the scene that about the Renewables Directive recast and the reason why Commission undertook that big actually project. As you can see from the slide, there is renewable sources by the member states and the performance in achievement of the targets by 2020, and those small yellow dots are showing where the targets should be, and the polls are showing where the targets actually could be in 2020 according to Eurostat. And that indicates the clear need for improvement in that field. And we have got the final text after the negotiations, what Pauline already mentioned. It took 2 years to negotiate with the Commission and the Member States, and also, of course, the industry involvement. We've got finally in December the file ready, and now we've got next 2.5 years by June 2021 to implement it to the national legislation. I also would like to show one more figure, and this is showing the current situation in the EU heat markets. As you can see, the EU heat markets in terms of renewability are not doing particularly great, especially if you took a look on the medium of European Union. So, of course, there is a performance like Nordic countries and some of the Baltic countries, which are really doing very great with the penetration of renewables in heating. But particularly, like smaller shares can be seen in several member states, and Netherlands being one of them, United Kingdom, and Ireland. We can say that maybe United Kingdom is not anymore the problem of European Union, but nobody knows. Let's see what happens in November. Coming from here to the actual Renewables Directive, this is really, really fast. I don't know why, but it doesn't like me. Let's see. Maybe it works like now. Yes. No. But I don't know how it works really. It just jumps. Commission wanted to address the untapped potential of heating and cooling. I have presented that there is a lot of potential to improve the renewability of heating and cooling, and there certainly is a need to do it because we all know that the carbonization of the whole energy sector cannot happen without heat sector being a part of it and very active part of it. Carlis mentioned in his presentation already earlier that there is this indicative target by the member states to improve the renewability of the district heating systems, particularly per 1.1 percentage point per year or 1.3 percentage points per year. The reason why there is this kind of variety is that member states got the flexibility to include or exclude waste heat from this greening target. And that also is actually very important because the Commission is leaving to the member states the flexibility to achieve cost effectiveness contribution to these 32 overall renewable targets on the EU level. However, what is happening also with the Renewables Directive and with the 2 other remaining parts of the regulation we are discussing today, Energy Performance of Buildings Directive and Energy Efficiency Directive, is that those files should create synergy. Synergy which will lead in turn to increased renewables, increased utilization of waste heat, and by a consequence to decrease utilization of primary fuels. There is a few particular articles. I don't want to go to extreme of details because it will take a long time, but I would like to mention a few of them. Article 2 sets the definition, many different definitions, but the one particularly important for the heat sector and also a new one is the definition of waste heat, which also can be translated as the recovered heat. And that definition also reflects then what can be included in completion of the target set by Article 23, which I already mentioned and Carlis mentioned, so you already know that there is the yearly increased target. It's also called in EU slang a greening heat target. There is also introduction of Article 19, which is providing the possibility voluntarily by the member states to include heat sector also in the guarantees of origin. So it's not only electricity and gas who can issue and trade the guarantees of origin, but it is also possibility for heat market to do it. Article 24, probably the most important for us in the district heating sector, the first article ever that is treating about organization of district heating networks, about organization of the network itself and about supplies to that network, plus treating about improved care about the customers connected to this district heating network. There is a number of different provisions on the customer protection. I think one of the most important of them is the right for the consumers and the customers of the district heating network for the information on the performance of the district heating network and level of the renewability of the supplies that this network is providing to them. As for the third-party access, or if you prefer, call it the network access model introduced in Article 24, it's also the tool actually to implement more renewables and more waste to energy for the district heating systems, which are not performing that great. But there is also a lot of provisions which are setting that this implementation of the third-party supplies should be based basically on cost effectiveness and technical possibility or feasibility to be able to supply that kind of new introduction of the new renewable source should provide. A very large piece of article, actually Article 26 on the sustainability criteria for the biomass. Initially, Commission was thinking to make it as a separate piece of legislation. In the end, it ended up as a part of Renewables Directive. With this article is actually having the most of the delegated acts to it, which are going to be prepared or are under the preparation in the Commission at the moment. But if I'm able to do it very fast, maybe it will work.
We can also do it for you.
Yes, please, if you could just, thank you very much. Carlis was mentioning about these national climate and energy plans to be provided by the member states, and I think that they are really important for us. They are also very important for the Commission to assess what can be done. And as you can see from the slide, the draft plans had to be already presented to the Commission by the end of last year. And by the end of this year, we are expecting the final plans to be submitted by all the member states, including or excluding Great Britain, let's see. So we will see what kind of trajectories and actually policy measures the member states are planning in respect to provide deployment of large amount of renewables, including electricity sector, heat sector, of course, and a transport sector. As for the implementation of those most important articles, which I mentioned already earlier, I think it's fair to say that this is going to vary. And based on my experience from the different markets, already seeing now that it's going to be difficult in some markets, and in some markets the implementation is almost there. So there is already there is no regulatory barriers, at least, to implement those three most important for us, Articles 2, 23, and 24. But we will see, probably very soon. We have heard that Commission is preparing some sort of guideline document or piece of several documents which will indicate how the member states should interpret those articles and what kind of implementation they should take up. If we may, thank you very much. I think it's also very fair to say that we are in the position to also give maybe a little bit guidelines to the Commission or to the Member State on what we would like to see or what kind of approach, or let's call it enablers, we would like to see for implementation of the Clean Energy Package and especially Renewables Directive. And based on my experience, as I mentioned, from several different markets, these national heat markets should be defined like a platform for the competition. So there is not such a thing like a district heating market, I think, in Europe. There is a heat markets or cooling markets, and they should be seen as such. The district heating is just one of the actors competing for the end customers with the other solutions. We have also seen in many markets that commercial approach should be applicable for those markets because it's triggering a lot more investments, a lot more development than a completely regulated environment. And we would like to see also that those regulations will lead to the modernization and improved efficiency. I think the efficiency is the key word here. It's not only to improve the amount of renewables supplies to the district heating network in terms of primary energy, but we should focus on improved efficiency and the performance of those networks. And by that, I would like to especially emphasize that the waste heat is really important, and it already happens that the waste heat is incorporated. It is part of the supplies, but unfortunately in some markets it's actually not legislatively possible even to price that as a product. So that barrier should definitely disappear. What we have discussed also here quite a lot during today, and I also appreciate it a lot, is the cooperation with the cities and the profound planning for heat supplies. I think it will have even more meaning in the future when we want to deliver upon those targets. Thank you very much.
Thank Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Monica. You pointed out that we needed also to consider the synergies between the different texts. So now we will move on to as important text as the two others for our sector, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive that Erik Turnström is going to present to us today. So Erik is part of Swedenergy, the Swedish Association for Energy, so electricity and heating and cooling. He is a senior advisor since 2011, and previous to this experience, he was with the Swedish Ministry of Energy. And since last autumn, Erik has been, we have had the pleasure to have Erik as our chairman of the Energy Policy Committee of EHP. Please, Erik, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I will also give a quite brief overview of this revised directive of energy performance of buildings. It's actually the third version of the energy performance of buildings directive. And like I say, I've followed this directive for some time. Actually, when I started to work in the Swedish government offices in 2001, this was the first file I negotiated for the Swedish government. So, yeah, it has happened quite much with the directive since then. Yeah, but just a summary of, well, now it's really fast again. A brief summary of the directive. This was the first file which was agreed upon in the Clean Energy Package. The negotiations were finalized about a year after the presentation from the EU-Commission, and it was published June last year. It contains several amendments. It's some new parts, but also amendments of previous articles. And the part of long-term renovation strategies has more emphasis in the revised directive. It has been moved from energy efficiency directive, some parts, and there are new provisions for member states to focus more on decarbonized building stock by 2050 and also focus on nearly zero energy buildings as a baseline for the building stock, also for existing buildings. The most important part, I think, are the changes in the calculation methods in Annex 1. And that's the equal treatment clause of renewable energy on-site versus off-site. Since the previous directive has had quite much of a focus on the building as such and focusing on individual installations and energy solutions, I think this is of great importance for our sector, that there is more thinking of the energy system perspective that is reflected now in a better way in the Annex 1. There are also some amendments of the articles regarding inspections and about inspection of heating systems. This is amended. It does not only covers boilers as in the previous directive. Now it's all kind of heating installations, which includes such as heat pumps and to some extent also district heating installations. Well, we also have some amended inspection requirements of air conditioning systems, and we also have some new provisions regarding technical building systems and requirements on building automation that would apply to all buildings, also existing buildings. And there is also some quite discussed part of the directing on smart readiness indicators. This ended up with some voluntary parts of the directive. that, well, is more of an information tool in practice. But this is still part of further work by the EU Commission that will end up in some delegated acts later this year. And finally, we also have some new provisions regarding electromobility. This does not really affect us, but it's interesting that they have included some completely new parts in this directive regarding minimum numbers of parking that are adapted for electromobility. And now we are in the middle of the implementation phase of this directive. It should be finished by March next year. So at least at home in Sweden, there are several ongoing investigations by the authorities and ministries, which we expect to be finalized the coming month, most of it, and then sent on consultation. So it's quite high level of engagement for us in this implementation work. So a bit more about what's really in it for us and our sector. I think, as mentioned in the previous picture, the equal treatment clause is really of big importance. Especially in Sweden, we have had a lot of debates about the system boundary and how to calculate the energy performance of buildings. So I think this is a clear move in the right direction for a more DC-10 approach. So we're quite happy about that. There's also one new amendment of the calculation methodology that member states should describe their national calculation methodology in relation to the overarching energy performance of buildings standards. And I think they are quite good. The Euroheat Power has engaged quite much the past years, and especially Ingo, which now unfortunately will leave the association. But I think it's good to have there, and it could give some help, at least for us, in the national implementation. And the next part, which we are more neutral about, is the possibility of replacing primary energy factors with weighting factors. And the problem we foresee there is no real definition of the weighting factors. How should they be set? It's quite much up to the authorities and what they think about it. And then there's also a good part that we managed to get some exemptions from inspection requirements regarding energy performance contracting and installations that are operated by a district heating company or network operator. So that means that district heating installation which are owned by a district heating company are not affected by those provisions. Well, this is really a tricky one. And finally, I think also the part on high efficiency alternatives, that one should reflect district heating, cooling, cogeneration, etc. Should be considered for new and existing buildings. Is good to have there. It was not part of the proposal from the EU Commission, so it was really good that we managed to get it back, and that this is highlighted. So some words also about the smart readiness indicator. What is this really about? As I mentioned, this is a voluntary part, so it's up to member states how to use it, but I think it's quite important for us to follow this process. This directive will be revised in the future, and it could be used in different ways in different pieces of legislations. So, well, it's more of an information tool. It's about information and awareness raising about the smart technologies for information and communication technologies in buildings. Well, There was a first study conducted by the E-Commission last year by a consultancy firm, and they listed about 100 services and sub-services in 10 different domains, including heating and cooling. So we will, in some parts, be affected by this. And there's a second technical study ongoing, which was launched in March this year. The plan from the Commission is that this will lead to 2 delegated acts about the methodology and the technical modalities. And there are also some expert groups following from the sector. So I think we will see by the end of this year where this will end. And what about the challenges in the national implementation? I think the most important part for us in Sweden is the choice of system boundary in the building codes. That's a tricky one. We have debated it for, I think, almost 15 years in Sweden. So this revised directive would, has already given some new fuel in that debate. And I think there are some positive parts. The weighting factors, I think, which we expect actually will be introduced in Sweden, opens up a bit for a bit uncertainty. There's no scientific method behind it, how to calculate them, and what kind of relations one really would like to see between different kind of heating sources. So that's something we have had a lot of discussions, I can say, with our national ministry. I think we have had at least 10 meetings with the ministry the past 2 months, so it's quite a high intensity for us now to really find good solutions in the implementation. We also see a tendency for gold plating of the inspection requirements and not making use of the flexibility regarding information and guidance alternatives and the possibilities to actually exclude some parts from the requirements. And especially when you speak to politicians, I think this is a rather technical directive. It's complex directive and also implementing regulations from 2012 and a lot of guidelines, a whole pile of them for each article, which now has been revised. And it's very much up to the experts in the authorities how to interpret all those parts. So that's the tricky one, and it creates, a lot of discussion, I can say, in Sweden. But we have some good hopes, at least, since now this issue and the EPBD implementation is also had at a high level, high political level. We have a 5-party coalition, a grand coalition dealing with the Swedish energy policy, and we are actually expecting some kind of conclusion regarding both the system boundary and the implementation of this directive the coming month, hopefully. So we have some light in the tunnel, actually, to find some better solutions for our sectors regarding the building codes. So, yeah, that was what I think I have time to tell about this. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Eric, and thank you all of you. I think, now we have painted the picture of really what we got out of this package, and also the implementing challenges that are related to the work of member states now. I wanted to follow up on our first topic. So we've seen that the EED forces metering and metering, billing, and information obligations for district heating providers. The package is generally increasing consumer friendliness with more transparency and access to information. However, Our industry is specific, and we know that district heating provider don't have direct contractual relationship with the final users, but with actually landlords or building owners. So Dominika, perhaps if you could envisage a little bit shortly what kind of impact, what are the impact of this new provision and the challenges related to the implementation, as well as how things can be implemented for the final consumer to access to the information in the end.
Okay, thank you for the question. I would say in a nutshell, it pretty much depends on the approach of the undertakings regarding at least the company side. So for several companies, it is indeed only a burden to implement the obligation, indeed to install remotely readable devices or to provide information. But for some undertakings, it is a chance to invest in new technologies. There are several very interesting pilot projects being carried out currently in Germany, and obviously this is a crucial step towards the digitalization of sector. So it is indeed needed. For some of undertakings, it is an opportunity to develop new business models. So yes, well, we see all range of approaches regarding the undertakings. And the final users, well, the interesting thing is a few years back, another German association carried out a survey in Germany regarding the satisfaction of consumers with different type of heating technologies in Germany. And more than 90%, about 93 as far as I remember, of the households connected to district heating were either satisfied or very satisfied with the services. So this is the question that I ask myself, can you make somebody happier than she already is? Yes. Well, I am not really able to assess whether the final customers will switch the supplier. You have to bear in mind that even though they might compare different offers of different suppliers, because district heating is a very local project, very local product, you do not always have this opportunity to switch to a different supplier, yes. And obviously it is limited to the final customer as well, yeah. But what I believe, just for the final remark, providing information is very important, but it cannot be considered as the only prerequisite. More important is to make the final users aware that through their reasonable and sensible decisions, they can change their behavior and have a considerable impact on the energy they use.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe conscious of the time, we can move on to a second question that will, unless you have anything to add to complete Dominika's answer. Then let's move on to a question on the Renewable Energy Directive. So we've seen that now district energy networks are expected, even though the target is not compulsory, but expected to contribute to the increase of the renewable shares, as well as to provide the possibility to use waste heat. So this is an opportunity and both also a challenge. But in your opinion, perhaps, Monica, what does the sector, the district heating and cooling sector, needs to ensure the rollout of renewable to contribute to this increased target?
Thank you for the question. I think that it's very important to acknowledge that there was some kind of assessment made by Rodel and partners last year. I think that there's 36 billion euros needed to green heat in Europe by 2030. So it's a relatively large number. So the question arises that how to do it and who is going to do it and then how to bear the costs. And I think that it's very relevant also to acknowledge that what is going to happen and what needs to happen is relatively open and very honest dialogue between decision makers, between the citizens in a certain way, maybe represented by some organizations, by the industry, but also by the cities. And everybody should take part in that dialogue, keeping in mind that there is, of course, a willingness needed to do something. There is a significant need also for the financial resources to deliver greenness to the heat sector, not only to the district heating. And I think also what is very important in this whole puzzle is the predictability and sustainability of the legislation once it is in place. So the transparent process of setting the legislation, dialogue, and thirdly, of course, the activation of the regulatory bodies to think more market-based, actually. Thanks.
So what, if they were in the room, what would you, but maybe that's a question for the National Association negotiating with national ministry, but what would you tell your national ministries to ensure this rollout of renewables?
Well, regarding the Renewables Directive, I think for Sweden, the directive does not mean that much in practice, since we have quite a high level of renewable energy and waste heat in the heating sector. So I think almost 100% of our district heating and cooling systems already achieve the standards in the Energy Efficiency Directive about efficient district heating or cooling system. So in most parts we will not really be affected by this, but still I think it's very good that it addresses waste heat in a very good way, that we should make use of waste heat in an equal manner in the same time when we increase the share of renewable energy. In some parts we expect there's some new paperwork legislation regarding the guarantees of origin. We also expect some amendments regarding the building codes to have more emphasis on the renewables, but in practice I don't think this will be a big issue for us.
So I can only agree with Monica has already said. In Germany, we still struggle, unfortunately, with increasing the share of renewables and waste heat in district heating. And I would say what is the most important is it is the basic thing. So it means a stable legal framework that would give the operators security, but also a perspective for the future to operate, because unfortunately the German government did not commit to district heating as the solution for the decarbonization of the sector. And this is what would be needed as the first condition. Yes.
Okay. Yes, maybe now we can open the floor for a question from the audience. Yeah, conscious of the time. If any of you wants to, yeah, yeah, thank you.
Sten Jensen from Kamstrup, especially to you, Dominika, in terms of the requirements on smart metering in Germany. How do you see the concerns on data privacy?
Yes, in Germany this is always a problem. Am I heard? Yes, yes, okay. So indeed in Germany this is always a problem. The German citizens have a very conservative approach regarding the data protection. And we know that now already a lot of operators try to introduce remotely readable devices, but the customers or the users simply do not wish to. So they have to agree indeed on having the meter exchanged, and they do not consent to do so. So indeed, I guess that would be the problem that the legislator will have to face in the end. This is the requirement of the EED, and even though the customers do not wish to have a remotely readable or a smart meter, they simply will have to accept it in the future. Yes.
We can take one more question, if you can be brief. Yeah, in the front here, the lady.
I'll speak up loud.
Okay.
Actually, I have two, but probably they're very easy questions. One is if fossil-based waste heat will count exactly the same as renewable, so that you don't have to, well, of course you have to replace this fossil-based industry at some point, but for houses it will count the same as renewable. And the other one is, can one or who can
Can you state your organization and your name?
DCMR Environmental Protection Agency.
Okay, thank you.
I guess that's for me. Yeah, I try to be brief. I think that the waste heat question ain't easy, and there is not a very easy answer to your question, but the one important factor is efficiency. So I think that we should not waste any primary fuels, you know, not even the biofuels, in terms of increasing just artificially the target when we know that we are having waste heat somewhere available and we could use it. Of course, like usually those sources which are providing the waste heat, they are either the heavy industry or then the waste heat comes from the fact that they are utilizing electricity. Heavy industry and the electricity production is under ETS, so basically there is a trajectory to clean it, and I think that it's going quite well with the price of CO2. We can see that that mechanism works, and we hope that it will work even better. And we are seeing the commitment from the electricity sector to decarbonize fast. At least that's what is now on the headlines. And I based on my experience, I think that introducing any more combustible, for instance, renewables to the systems, just for the sake to increase the renewability, it's maybe not the best idea. I hope that I respond to your question. The other one was about waste.
Distinguish between renewable sources, for instance, to prefer low-quality energy over high-quality energy.
I think that that's the question actually to be asked. Probably there has to be some involvement of calculation, which I'm not able to provide at the moment. And I haven't been actually thinking about low quality energy and high quality energy. We can take it up maybe during the break because we are running out of time. But definitely it's something that one should take into consideration. And I think the Commission will be thinking about it in the guideline document that will explain the waste heat issue maybe during still this fall.
Yeah, I think on this question we will have the session tomorrow morning on waste heat, and you will give actually quite a good presentation on the question of the quality of energy. Thanks. So yeah, I think unless there are any other questions, we all very keen on concluding this session. And so I would like to thank our speakers, panelists for their good presentations, and thank you the audience for attending despite this session being quite late and being before our next events. So I would like to invite you later on to continue the discussion if you will attend to the networking dinner. And well, yes, thank you for coming today and discussing with us the implementation of the package.